It makes a ton of sense. My question, James, is I'm sure you talk to people in college athletics. Is the president at Wazoo and Baylor and Texas Tech or wherever, are they thinking this way, do you think? Or are they going, hey, expanded playoff, baby, that's our life raft?
I can't speak for the presidents of some of those schools you just rattled off there. And by the way, and I wouldn't necessarily lump them all together because even there, I think their resources are not necessarily the same. Look, the way I think you have to look at this, if you're a fan of a school that is not necessarily among the highest in resources, particularly if you're not, obviously, again, the Big Ten and the SEC. Even if they've had success, even if they've been more successful than some of those other teams and some of those schools that are in those leagues. Okay. Well, if you've been more successful, maybe you end up getting them there eventually. If your team, your school, whatever, just isn't. And maybe they just haven't been competitive. Haven't been competitive in a while. Not regularly competing for championships in any sport, let alone football. And it's just not a thing. It's just not regularly a thing. You got to ask yourself that if we got to that point, if that's I'm going to say even doomsday, if that's just a scenario by which is possible, contractually speaking. All right, well then how do you best position yourself if the highest level of the sport becomes 2 super leagues of whatever size they end up being, and if you're not invited to one of them, you're not in the big kid party. What, you're going to fold up the football program? No. You just compete at the level at which you are already competing, whereby your resources allow you to. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all for some schools. I think some schools who are already basically perennial doormats in their leagues, if the very top get lopped off and put aside into super leagues, and then whatever's left over is now competing and playing for a championship at a new subdivision level to be named later, that subdivision will have a level of competition that's probably more level, more competitive, more fair for those schools, for those teams with much more like-minded resources, and that people will still watch those games too. See, and frankly, some of those schools will win more because they're not going to get their doors blown off, by some of the teams who just have beaten them for, 19 out of the last 20 years or something.
You and I have disagreed on that. You and I talked, by the way, I told everybody this a couple of nights ago. I love what our conversation was like. We didn't agree on everything. See, that's where for example, and I'm not saying they would be, but there is the possibility that Oregon, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Washington, those are 4, name maybe even a couple of others, are left out of the big boy party. I do think that would be devastating to them because of the resources they put in to be who they are right now and into the future. You don't agree with that?
If for those entities you just mentioned specifically, David, they get left out only if 2 super leagues sit at 16, because we know who the 16 are. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They only get left out if we're talking about, but I don't think we get, if we went to that point, if we got to the 2 conferences, have the postseason, and that's it, I don't think we sit at 16. I don't think we sit with 32. So I don't think those are the entities that we have to worry about being left out, personally. I think there are some other names you could mention in there, but I don't think those are 4 that would be at the top of the list to be left out. But hypothetically, just for the sake of your question, yeah, obviously it could have some negative consequences for some folks too. It could have some negative consequences for some folks who right now are probably getting a sweetheart deal with their grant of rights as it is, even if it's not particularly good, relatively speaking, because what that entity, what that school brings to the table may be little to nothing by way of relative competitive success in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So depending on who it is, but you just happen to pick, probably of the remaining teams in the Pac-12 and Big 12, quite literally for arguably maybe the 4 biggest names. So I'm with you. I hear you. Yes, hypothetically, if it was 2 conferences and it's the 32 teams that we know of, that wouldn't be great. You're absolutely right. But I think if we went to a SEC Big Ten playoff of the future, whether that's, again, 2026 or 2036, or, frankly, 2046, whatever it is, I think we could get there eventually. And I don't think I'm the only one, guys, because, again, everybody pulled up the old quote from the LSU president from 10-plus years ago, whether it was 09 or 11, saying, I think we're headed for two conferences, Fox and ESPN. So it's not like I'm talking way out of school and I'm going way out on a limb here. It's like, I think people have kind of seen where the money is going with all this, and it's getting to be so enormous. All right, well, if we get there, then, like I said, then I don't think we're talking about two conferences with 16 teams apiece is all. But if it did, then, yeah, then there'd be a whole lot of people left out. That's where I think you'd have greater pushback. But if the first decision is this is the system and structure, and coinciding with it, significant expansion of both leagues in order to be that much more inclusive and drive up the relative values of each of those leagues even more so, well, then, not for nothing, if it got to 24 apiece for the sake of argument, is anyone really, truly? And I know there's going to be some fans out there who are going to say, yeah, but I love my little school, and, once every 20 years we have a phenomenal season. That's great. But you're not moving the needle every week. And could you absolutely crown a national champion out of the top nearly 50 schools with the most resources on an annual basis? And would anyone say boo? Would anyone raise a hand and say, but wait, this undefeated team who only played competition, who didn't include all those top 50, this team is really the legitimate national champion? No. I know Central Florida. I know. I'm sure if I was saying this in Orlando today, someone would, curse me, from the beginning. But nevertheless, truly, you would be able to crown a legitimate national champion, and a whole lot of people will be watching if the top roughly 50 brands in college football and college sports as a whole, because I don't think this stops at football, by the way, guys, broke apart. And whether it's a formal breaking away or just using the playoff structure as the means by which to do this, I don't think anyone's going to have a problem, truly.
James,
other than, yes, if you're a fan of one of the smaller schools that gets left behind, but as I say, that's a relative term, because I think you're going to be more competitive playing people who have more light resources than you. Let's not kid ourselves. Oregon State and Washington State are not competing for a national championship every year, and they don't have anywhere near the same stratosphere of resources as Georgia and Alabama and Texas. No, they don't. And they're never going to.
Hey, James, I'm going to let Craig ask one more question.